The damp cold of Britannia seeps through the wattle and daub walls, settling into the marrow of my bones long before my eyes open. It is a heavy, wet chill, distinct from the sharp, dry bite of a winter in Rome. Here in Aquae Sulis, the air tastes of two things. First is the biting smoke of wood fires that clings to the valley mist. Second is the rotten, metallic tang of the sacred spring, the smell of deep earth and boiling sulfur that never truly leaves your nose. I shift on the pallet. The mattress is a rough ticking of canvas, stuffed with straw that has broken down into dust over the last 6 months. It offers little protection against the hardness of the beaten earth floor beneath me. The wool blanket covering me is coarse, woven from the oily, unbleached fleece of local sheep. It scratches against my neck, heavy and damp from the ambient moisture of the room. Darkness still holds the room. The only light comes from the dying embers of the brazier in the center of the shared living space, casting a faint, dull red glow on the peeling plaster of the opposite wall. My breath plumes in the air, a fleeting ghost of white vapor. I listen to the rhythm of the house. Beside me, my brother in labor, Lucius, breathes with a rattling snore, his chest rising and falling under his own heap of gray wool. I push the blanket aside. The cold air strikes my skin immediately, raising goose flesh on my arms. I sit up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes with calloused knuckles. The floor is freezing against the soles of my feet as I stand. I reach for the oil lamp, sitting on a low wooden stool. It is a cheap thing, mass-produced terracotta with a chipped nozzle, covered in a layer of greasy soot. I strike a spark against the flint and tinder, blowing gently until the flame catches the charred linen wick. The light flares, yellow and wavering, revealing the cramped dimensions of our quarters. There is no time to linger. The baths do not wake themselves. I move to the wash basin in the corner. The water in the ceramic pitcher has formed a thin skin of ice overnight. I break it with my thumb, the cracking sound sharp in the quiet room. I pour the freezing water into the basin and splash it over my face. It shocks the lethargy out of me, stinging my cheeks. I have no soap. Instead, I use a small scraping of pumice stone to scour the dead skin from my elbows and hands, followed by a rub with a rough linen cloth. For my teeth, I use a frayed twig of hazel, dipping it into a small pot of ground oyster shell and charcoal to scrub away the film of the night. I rinse my mouth with the icy water and spit into the latrine bucket. Dressing is a ritual of layers. In this province, warmth is the only luxury that matters. First, I step into my subligaculum. It is a simple loincloth of undyed linen, shaped like a triangle. I tie the strings around my waist, pulling the fabric up between my legs and tucking the flap securely beneath the belt line. It is clean, laundered yesterday in urine and sulfur, and stiff against my skin. Next comes the tunic. It is russet-colored wool, thick and slightly greasy to the touch, because the natural lanolin has been left in the fibers to repel water. I pull it over my head. It falls to my knees, loose and boxy. I cinch it at the waist with a leather belt. The leather is old, cracked at the edges, and darkened by sweat and oil. I pull the fabric up over the belt to create a blousing effect, shortening the hem to just above my knees to allow for freedom of movement. Because it is winter, I wrap my legs. I take long strips of wool, the fasciae, and wind them tightly from my ankles up to my calves. They provide support for the heavy lifting to come and shield my shins from the radiant heat of the furnaces. Finally, I sit to put on my boots. They are heavy leather, closed at the toe, unlike the sandals of summer. The soles are studded with iron hobnails. I lace them tight, the leather creaking. Every knot must be secure. A loose lace in the hypocaust tunnels can mean a stumble, and a stumble there can mean a burn that never heals. I step out of the sleeping quarters into the main room of the insula. The air here is thick with the smell of stale smoke and unwashed bodies. I move to the small preparation table to break my fast. The morning meal, the intaculum, is not for pleasure. It is fuel for the furnace of the body. On the table sits a bowl of pools, the staple grain porridge of the empire. It was cooked last night and has settled into a cold, gelatinous solid. It is made from emmer wheat, boiled with water until the grains burst. I use a wooden spoon to break off a chunk. It is bland, tasting of wet grain and the iron pot it was cooked in. To make it palatable, I drizzle a small amount of olive oil over it. The oil is green and cloudy, the dregs of a jar imported from Hispania. I sprinkle a pinch of coarse sea salt on top. I eat standing up. The cold porridge sits heavy in my stomach. I tear off a piece of hard, dark bread, baking it twice to ensure it lasts, and chew it thoughtfully. It fights back against my teeth. Along with the bread, I drink a cup of watered wine. It is sour, little more than vinegar, but it cuts the slime of the porridge and wakes the gut. I wipe my mouth with the back of my hand, blow out the lamp, and step out into the street. The sky above Aquae Sulis is a bruised purple, the sun struggling to rise behind a wall of gray clouds. The street is narrow, paved with irregular stones that are slick with morning dew and mud. The city is waking up. I hear the rattle of a cart turning a corner, the wooden wheels grinding against the stone. A dog barks in the distance, a sharp, rhythmic sound. The air is filled with the smell of wood smoke rising from 100 chimneys, mixing with the ever-present sulfur. I walk quickly. The hobnails of my boots click rhythmically on the paving stones. A sound that echoes off the stone facades of the buildings. I pull my rough woolen cloak, the sagum tighter around my shoulders. It is pinned at the right shoulder with a simple bronze fibula, leaving my right arm free. My destination looms ahead, the Thermae, the great bath. Even from here, I can see the steam rising from the precinct, a white pillar connecting the earth to the sky. The complex is a massive structure of stone and tile, a testament to Rome's power to tame even the boiling waters of the earth. I do not enter through the grand portico with its fluted columns and painted pediments where the patrons will stroll in 3 hours. I circle around to the service entrance on the eastern side near the stoker's yard. The ground here turns from stone to packed earth, churned into black mud by the constant traffic of wood carts. The heat hits me before I even enter the building. It radiates from the walls, a dull, throbbing warmth that defies the British winter. I duck through the low archway into the service corridors. These tunnels are the veins of the bathhouse, hidden from the eyes of the wealthy. They are narrow, brick-lined passages that smell of dry heat, charcoal dust, and sweat. I arrive at the Prefernium, the furnace room. It is a cavernous space, sunk below the level of the bath floors. The air here is dry and scorching. Piles of fuel are stacked against the walls. Seasoned oak logs, charcoal for the intense heat, and bundles of brushwood for quick ignition. The overseer, a grim man named Marcus, with a face scarred by flying embers, nods at me. He points to the number 3 furnace. It feeds the tepidarium, the warm room. It has been banked down for the night and needs to be brought up to temperature. I strip off my cloak and hang it on a wooden peg. The heat here makes the wool tunic feel heavy, but I cannot remove it. The radiant heat from the furnace mouth can blister bare skin in minutes. I grab a heavy iron rake, the handle polished smooth by years of use. I approach the furnace mouth. It is a brick arch, black with soot. I kneel, feeling the heat sear my eyebrows. Inside, the embers glow a deep, malevolent red. I use the rake to pull the ash forward, clearing the airway. The ash falls into the pit below, sending up a cloud of gray dust that coats my tongue. I cough, a dry, hacking sound, and spit the grit onto the floor. Now begins the feeding. I turn to the woodpile. I select logs of oak, heavy and dense. I heave one onto my shoulder, the bark digging into the wool of my tunic. I throw it into the maw of the furnace. Then another, and another. The fire creates a vacuum, sucking the air past me with a low, roaring sound. I watch as the wood catches, the flames licking up the sides of the logs, turning from red to orange to a clean, hot yellow. This fire does not just heat water. It heats the air. I can visualize the path of the heat as I work. It flows from this fire into the hypocaust, the space beneath the floor of the warm room. There, the floor is suspended on stacks of tiles, the pilli. The hot air circulates through that forest of pillars, warming the floor tiles above, before being drawn up through hollow box tiles in the walls. It is a living respiratory system, and I am the one who keeps it breathing. Once the fire is roaring, I leave the furnace room to check the caldarium, the hot bath. I climb the service stairs, my boots heavy on the stone steps. I emerge onto the floor of the bath complex. It is silent here, hauntingly empty. The high vaulted ceiling is lost in shadows. The walls are painted in vibrant reds and ochres, depicting scenes of nymphs and aquatic gods. But in the dim light, they look like watching spirits. The floor is a masterpiece of mosaic, smooth tesserae under my feet, already warm from the fires below. I walk to the edge of the great bath. This is the heart of the complex. The pool is lined with sheets of lead, folded and soldered to be watertight. The water is green, opaque with minerals, steaming gently. Bubbles rise from the bottom, releasing that familiar sulfur smell. My task here is cleaning. Before the citizens arrive, the water must be pristine. I pick up a long-handled net. I walk the perimeter, skimming the surface. I catch a few dead beetles that have wandered in seeking warmth, and leaves that have blown in through the high windows in the roof vault. The steam makes my tunic cling to my back. I am sweating now, the sweat mixing with the soot from the furnace room. I check the overflow drain. The water constantly flows into the bath from the sacred spring, and must flow out just as fast to keep the level constant and the water fresh. I kneel on the wet stone. The lead lining around the drain is stained orange from the iron in the water. I reach in with a hooked metal tool to clear a clump of algae that is blocking the flow. The algae is slimy and warm, feeling like living flesh in my hand. I pull it free, and the water gurgles, swirling down into the great drain that leads to the river Avon. I stand and wipe my hands on a rag tucked into my belt. The light is changing. Through the arched windows high above, the gray sky is brightening. The first shafts of weak sunlight are piercing the steam, turning the rising vapor into columns of gold. I hear the heavy timber doors of the main entrance, unbarred in the distance. The sound reverberates through the cavernous hall. The slaves of the household are arriving to set up the changing rooms, laying out oils and strigils. I retreat back to the shadows of the service corridors. My time in the light is over. For the rest of the day, I will be a ghost in the machine. I will be in the tunnels, hauling wood, raking ash, and ensuring that when the governor of Britannia dips his toe into the water, he feels nothing but the perfect, embracing heat of Rome. I descend the stairs back to the furnace room. My stomach rumbles, digesting the heavy porridge. I pick up the iron shovel. The pile of ash under furnace number 2 needs clearing. I set my feet, gripping the handle. The day has truly begun. The sun, usually a pale and watery disk behind the eternal gray veil of Britannia, has climbed to its zenith, though here in the depths of the bathhouse, the time of day is measured not by light, but by heat and the thickness of the air. My world is the caldarium, the hot room, and the service corridors that run like arteries behind the painted plaster walls. The labor has shifted from the morning preparation to the midday crush. The silence of dawn has been replaced by a cacophony that reverberates off the vaulted masonry. It is a wall of sound composed of splashing water, the slap of wet skin against stone, the heavy clack of wooden sandals, and 100 voices speaking a chaotic slurry of Latin and the guttural local Celtic tongue. I stand near the entrance of the hot room, my tunic clingy and damp with sweat that is not entirely my own. My station is the transition point, the threshold where men shed the last pretenses of dignity along with their sweat. The air here is so heavy with moisture it feels solid, a physical weight pressing against the chest. It smells of sulfur from the sacred spring, mingled with the sharp tang of wood smoke leaking from the hypocaust vents, unwashed bodies, and the cloying sweetness of cheap rose oil. My primary tool for this hour is the strigil. It hangs from a leather loop at my belt, clicking rhythmically against the small bronze flask of oil, the araballos. The strigil is a curved blade of bronze, shaped like a sickle, but with a blunt, rounded edge. It is dull enough not to slice the skin, but sharp enough to drag heavily against it. The handle is bone, smooth to a shine by the grease of 1,000 hands. A patron approaches. He is a decurion, a cavalry officer stationed at the fortress. His body is a map of his profession. Pale scars crisscross his forearms, and his skin is weathered to the texture of cured leather. He does not speak to me. To him, I am merely a mechanism of the baths, as functional and invisible as the lead pipes channeling the water. He extends an arm, the muscle thick and knotted. I unstopper my oil flask. The oil is olive, imported from Hispania, thick and golden green. It is the lifeblood of the empire, used for cooking, lighting, and here, for cleaning. I pour a generous amount into my palm. The oil is warm, heated by the ambient temperature of the room. I slap it onto his shoulder and begin to rub. This is not a gentle massage. My fingers dig into the trapezius muscle, working the oil deep into the pores. The goal is to loosen the dirt, the dust of the road, and the dead skin. The officer grunts, leaning his weight against a marble pillar. His skin is hot to the touch, radiant with the heat absorbed from the floor and the humid air. Once the oil is worked in, I take the strigil. This is the sensory core of my day. I press the bronze curve against his shoulder blade. I apply pressure. Then I pull. The sensation is distinct. It is a vibration that travels up the metal handle and into my wrist. The bronze drags, catching on the friction of the oil and dirt. As I pull the blade down the length of his back, it gathers a gray, viscous sludge. We call it glyos. It is a mixture of sweat, oil, road dust, and dead epidermis. It rolls off the blade in thick, cohesive ribbons. I flick the sludge into a wooden bucket at my feet. The sound is a wet slap. Scrape, drag, flick, scrape, drag, flick. I work methodically down his back, over the flanks, and down the backs of his legs. The strigil creates a dull, singing friction sound, like a stone being dragged over wet leather. The officer's skin turns pink under the abrasion. This is the cleaning of the Roman world. We do not use soap. We use oil to bind the filth and bronze, to scrape it away. It is an aggressive, physical act. My arm burns. The triceps ache with the repetitive motion. The heat of the room makes my heart hammer against my ribs. I am breathing the same air these men are exhaling, a recycled atmosphere of steam and breath. Sweat runs into my eyes, stinging with salt. I wipe it away with the back of my forearm, careful not to transfer the patron's grime onto my face. When the officer is finished, he moves toward the plunge bath, his skin glistening and raw. I do not have time to rest. Another man steps forward. This one is a local merchant, softer, his flesh pale and doughy. The texture of the work changes. The strigil sinks deeper. The drag is heavier. I must adjust my pressure to avoid bruising him. It is a constant modulation of force, a dialogue between the bronze tool and the human form. After 2 hours of this relentless scraping, the sun overhead begins to dip, though the gloom of the bathhouse remains constant. It is time for the rotation. I signal to Calus, a younger slave with a shock of red hair that marks his northern birth. He takes up the strigil, and I retreat into the service corridors for the midday meal. The transition is abrupt. I step from the humid, echoing grandeur of the caldarium into the dry, dusty heat of the prefernium, the furnace room. Here, the air is choked with charcoal dust. The only light comes from the glowing maw of the furnace, and the daylight filtering down from high, soot-stained vents. I sit on a stack of dried oak logs, the rough bark digging into the back of my thighs. My hands feel coated in a phantom film of oil, no matter how much I wipe them on my tunic. The meal, the prandium, is simple. It is fuel, nothing more. I unwrap a cloth bundle. Inside is a wedge of panis sordidus, the coarse, dark bread of the lower classes. It is dense, heavy with spelt flour and bran. As I bite into it, I can feel the grit of the millstone against my teeth. It is dry, demanding saliva I currently lack. To accompany the bread, I have a small clay pot of mortem. It is a spread made of sheep's cheese, garlic, vinegar, and herbs, pounded together in a mortar. It is pungent and sharp. I scoop it up with the bread. The garlic burns the tongue, cutting through the lingering taste of sulfur and sweat. It is strong flavor, needed to wake the senses after the dulling heat of the baths. My drink is pasca, contained in a battered leather costrel. It is water mixed with wine vinegar, and perhaps a pinch of coriander seeds. It is sour, causing the jaw to tighten, but it is safer than plain water and infinitely more refreshing. The vinegar cuts the thirst and replenishes the salt lost to the steam. I drink deeply, the liquid cool against my parched throat. I am not alone. Two of the stokers, men named Aulis and Bodvak, are resting near the woodpile. They are blackened from head to toe with soot, their eyes staring out like white marbles from dark masks. Bodvak is a Briton like me, though he speaks little Latin. He is whittling a piece of kindling with a small iron knife. The heat in the furnace room is different from the baths. It is a dry, roasting heat. The fire roars behind the brick arch, a low, continuous rumble that vibrates through the floor. This is the heart of the beast. The hypocaust system relies on this fire. The hot air is drawn from here, under the raised floor of the baths, circulating around the pilly stacks, the pillars of tiles that hold up the floor before rising up through the hollow box tiles in the walls. The draft is poor today, Aulis grumbles, tearing a piece of bread with blackened fingers. The wind is coming from the north, pushes the smoke back down the flue. I nod, chewing slowly. The patrons are complaining of the smoke in the tepidarium. Their eyes are watering. Aulis spits an olive pit onto the dusty floor. Let them weep. If I open the damper more, we burn through the wood before nones. Then the steward will have my hide for wasting fuel. We eat in a companionable silence, born of exhaustion. The social dynamic here is flat. We are all property, or close enough to it. Yet there is a hierarchy. The stokers are the muscles, living in the dark. I, as an attendant, am the face, living in the steam. We bridge the gap between the dirt of the fire and the luxury of the bath. A rat scuttles along the wall, near the woodpile. Bodvak watches it, but does not move. The vermin are as much a part of this place as we are, thriving on the warmth and the crumbs of our bread. I finish the last of the cheese spread, wiping the clay pot clean with the crust. The food sits heavy in my stomach, a dense lump of grain and cheese. It is not enough to truly satisfy, but enough to keep the trembling of fatigue at bay. Before I return to the floor, I step out a side door for a breath of real air. I stand in the service alleyway behind the complex. The air here is cool and damp, carrying the scent of rain and wet stone. I look out over the landscape of Aquae Sulis. The town is a cluster of tile roofs and timber frames, huddled around the steam of the sacred precinct. To the west, the hills rise up, green and brooding, vanishing into the low-hanging clouds. The river Avon winds below, swollen and brown. This place is strange. It is Rome, with its columns and mosaics and engineering, grafted onto a wild, wet island. The locals worship Sulis here, a goddess of the spring. The Romans call her Minerva. In the bathhouse, we serve both. We scrub the Romans who pray to Minerva, and the Britons who mutter to Sulis. I can hear the city from here, the clanging of a smithy, the barking of dogs, the shouting of hawkers selling sausages, and hot wine to the crowds leaving the baths. It is a busy, thriving noise, but beneath it, there is always the sound of water, the rushing of the drains, the gurgling of the overflow. I check the position of the sun. It is time. I return inside, the heat hitting me like a physical blow. I make my way back to the changing room, the apoditerium, to relieve the guard there. My task shifts now. I am no longer scrubbing. I am watching. The changing room is a cavernous hall with niches in the walls for clothes. It is a place of high theft. A tunic left unguarded is a tunic lost. The room smells of wet wool and leather sandals. I stand by a bench, my eyes scanning the room. A group of young men, sons of wealthy merchants, are laughing loudly, stripping off their clothes. They toss their fine wool cloaks onto the shelf without a care. They assume their possessions are safe because the law says so. I know they are safe only because I am standing here. I see a figure lurking near the entrance, a man with shifting eyes and a tunic that is too large for him. A bath thief. They are common. They wait for the moment the attendant turns his head. I lock eyes with him. I do not speak. I simply place my hand on the hilt of my strigil, treating it now as a weapon rather than a tool. He holds my gaze for a second, then turns and slips back out into the street. The sensory monotony sets in. The dampness seeps into my sandals. My feet are swollen. The noise is unceasing. Suddenly, a commotion erupts near the entrance to the great bath. I move quickly, weaving through the naked and half-clothed bodies. A patron has slipped. The limestone floor, polished by feet and slick with water, is treacherous. An older man lies on the ground, clutching his ankle, his face twisted in pain. He is groaning. I kneel beside him. The stone is cold and slimy under my knees. Do not move, Dominus, I say, my voice practiced and calm. I signal to another attendant. We must lift him. He is heavy, dead weight. I grip him under the arms, my hands slipping on his wet skin. The smell of him is overpowering garlic from his lunch. and the metallic tang of the mineral water. We hoist him up. He cries out, a sharp, jagged sound that cuts through the chatter of the hall. We carry him to a bench. I run my hands over his ankle. It is swelling already, tight and angry. Ice, he gasps. No ice here, Dominus, I say gently. Cold water from the frigidarium. I fetch a sponge, soaking it in the cold plunge pool. The water in the frigidarium is distinct. It does not smell of sulfur like the hot spring. It is river water, piped in from the hills. I press the cold sponge to his ankle. He hisses through his teeth. This is the reality of the midday peak. It is not just leisure. It is a factory of bodies. We process them. We clean them. We guard their clothes. We tend to their injuries. We are the oil in the machine. As I hold the sponge, I look across the great bath. The steam rises from the surface of the green water in thick, swirling columns, catching the light from the high windows. Statues of emperors and gods look down from the alcoves, their stone eyes blind to the nudity and the noise. In the center of the pool, a woman is tossing something into the water. A small sheet of lead, rolled up tight. A curse tablet. She is whispering, her face tight with anger. She is likely cursing a thief who stole her cloak, or a lover who jilted her. She is giving her grievance to the goddess Sulis. I watch the lead sink into the green depths, joining thousands of others. The water bubbles up around it, hot and indifferent. My stomach churns slightly from the heavy bread and the humidity. The sponge in my hand is warming up, sucking the heat from the man's injury. I squeeze it out, cold water turning tepid, dripping onto the mosaic floor, and return to the cold pool to soak it again. The cycle continues. The heat, the scrape, the guard, the lift. The sun moves across the clerestory windows, casting shifting parallelograms of light onto the steam. My day is only half over. The afternoon rush, the soldiers off duty, the noise, it will all intensify before the bells ring for closing. I take a breath of the thick, sulfurous air, steeling myself. I am a part of the stone, a part of the steam. I am the bath attendant. The sun has moved past the apex of the vaulted timber roof, casting long, fractured shadows across the surface of the great bath. The light has changed from the harsh, vertical glare of midday to a heavy, golden haze that seems to thicken the steam rising from the green water. This is the hardest part of the day. The novelty of the morning rush has dissolved, and the anticipation of the evening meal is still too distant to offer comfort. There is only the heat, the humidity, and the relentless friction of bronze against skin. My hands are cramping. It is a dull, throbbing ache that starts in the webbing between my thumb and forefinger and wraps around my wrist like a tight leather cuff. I am currently attending to a decurion, a minor cavalry officer stationed here from the fort at Iska. He is a heavy man, his skin bronzed by campaigns in darker lands, but softened now by the garrison life. He lies face down on the marble slab in the tepidarium, the warm room where the air is kept at a constant blood temperature warmth by the hypocaust fires burning beneath the floor. I grip the strigil, the curved metal scraping tool. It has a handle of bone, worn smooth and yellow by years of use, but the blade is iron, kept sharp enough to scrape, but dull enough not to flay. I press the concave edge against the officer's shoulder blade. The oil I applied earlier, a thick green-gold fluid scented with cheap rosemary, has mixed with his sweat and the dead skin of his back to form a gray sludge. With a steady, rhythmic pull, I drag the tool down his spine. The sensation is transmitted up my arm. I can feel the knots in his muscle, the ridges of his scars, and the coarse texture of his hair. The tool collects the gray paste. I flick my wrist, snapping the waste into a small wooden bucket on the floor. Slap, scrape, flick. This is the rhythm of the afternoon. It is not a conversation. It is a mechanical process. My tunic, once a crisp, unbleached linen, is now plastered to my chest, transparent with perspiration. In the tepidarium, there is no breeze. The heat radiates from the walls, which are hollowed out with box flue tiles to carry the hot air up from the furnace. I am breathing the same air as 50 other men, all sweating, all oiling, all exhaling. The smell is a dense, savory soup of unwashed bodies, sulfur from the sacred spring, aromatic oils, and the underlying metallic tang of the hot lead pipes. The officer grunts, signaling me to move to his legs. I kneel on the floor. The heat of the mosaic tiles presses through the calluses on my knees. The floor is opus signinum, a waterproof concrete mixed with crushed brick, polished until it gleams red. It is beautiful to look at, but unforgiving to kneel on for 6 hours. I pour more oil from the araballos, a small round flask attached to my belt by a leather thong. The oil is warm. I rub it into his calves, my thumbs working deep into the gastrocnemius muscle. He winces, then sighs. This is the service they pay for. Not just cleanliness, but the loosening of the armor's grip on the body. My eyes drift while my hands work. Across the room, I see Marcus, another attendant, leaning against a column. He looks pale. The heat gets to us all eventually. If you stop moving, the blood pools in your feet, and the humidity sits in your lungs like water. I catch his eye and give a small nod. He pushes himself off the column and goes back to scrubbing a merchant's heel with a pumice stone. We are the machinery of the bathhouse, as essential and invisible as the lead pipes in the walls. The officer rolls over. I have to scrape his chest now. This requires more care. The skin over the sternum is thin. I adjust my grip on the strigil, changing the angle of attack. He stares up at the ceiling, his eyes glazed over in the semi-comatose state that the heat induces. He does not see me. To him, I am a pair of floating hands. When he is finally done, he stands, slippery and pink. He tosses a small copper coin onto the slab. It spins and settles near a puddle of oil. It is a quadrans, the smallest denomination. A meager tip for 40 minutes of labor, but I nod my head in thanks. I swipe the coin and tuck it into the fold of my sash before he turns away. I have no time to rest. The slab must be cleaned. I grab a bucket of water from the corner basin. I splash it over the marble, washing away the gray slurry of oil and skin. I take a rough sponge and scrub the stone, then swipe it dry with a coarse rag. The next patron is already waiting, a nervous-looking man with the pale complexion of a scribe. He looks at the slab, then at me. I gesture for him to lie down. The cycle begins again. Mid-afternoon brings a change in the atmosphere. The rowdy soldiers and the wealthy merchants begin to filter out, heading to dinner parties or the taverns. In their place come the sick and the desperate. Aquae Sulis is not just a bath, it is a healing shrine. The goddess Sulis, Minerva, dwells in the scalding water that bubbles up from the deep earth. People come here when the doctors fail. I am called away from the massage slabs to the great bath. The overseer, a severe man named Lucius, points toward the far corner of the main pool. Go, he says. The drain is sluggish again. This is the task I dread most. The great bath is lined with sheets of lead, folded over the stone steps. The water is deep green, opaque with minerals and algae. It steams constantly. In the far corner, where the overflow water drains out toward the river Avon, debris collects. I walk along the limestone pavement. The air here is cooler than in the heated rooms, but the humidity is higher. Mist hangs over the water. I see figures wading waist deep in the green soup. Some are praying, their hands raised, whispering to the goddess. Others are drinking the water from small cups, grimacing at the metallic taste. I reach the corner. The water level is high, lapping over the edge of the stone curb. The drain is blocked. I strip off my sandals. I step into the water. It is hot, perhaps 45 degrees Celsius. It shocks the skin, turning my feet red instantly. I wade toward the blockage. The bottom is slippery with algae. I reach the lead pipe opening. It is submerged. I have to crouch, immersing my chest in the hot, sulfurous water, and feel blindly with my hands. My fingers brush against something slimy. I grimace. It is a mat of hair, human hair, shed by thousands of bathers, tangled together with lint from towels. leaves that have blown in through the open roof, and lost bandages. I pull. The mass resists. It is wedged tight. I take a breath and submerge my face, trying to see through the murky green gloom. My eyes sting. I can see the dark mouth of the pipe. I jam my hand deeper, my fingers scraping against the lead. I find the core of the blockage, a small wooden votive object, perhaps a carved breast or a foot, offered by a pilgrim, which has floated into the pipe and caught the hair. I wrench it free. A cloud of black silt blooms in the water. The suction breaks with a deep, gurgling belch, and the water begins to swirl, rushing down the dark throat of the drain. I stand up, gasping for cooler air. I am holding a dripping, foul-smelling clump of refuse. In the center of the hairball is indeed a small wooden carving of a leg. Someone prayed for their leg to be healed, and instead, they clogged the plumbing. I wade back to the side, climbing out onto the stone. My tunic is soaked with the sacred water. It cools rapidly in the air, clinging to me like a second skin. I toss the refuse into a waste basket and walk toward the service entrance to wring out my clothes. As I squeeze the water from the linen, watching it drip onto the dusty floor of the service corridor, I feel the weight of the hours. My skin is pruned and wrinkled from the moisture. My back aches from the bending, but the light is changing again. The beams of sunlight entering the high windows have turned orange and horizontal. I return to the main hall. The crowd has thinned significantly. Now the space is occupied by the locals, the Britons who live in the settlement around the fort. Their Latin is rougher, their laughter louder. The social etiquette of the Roman elite dissolves into something more communal. A group of men are sitting on the steps of the bath, playing a game of dice. They shout and splash water at each other. I am tasked with collecting the used towels. These are not the fluffy loops of the future, but flat-woven linen, heavy when wet. I move around the perimeter, gathering them from benches and niches. One of the men calls out to me. He holds up a small flask. "Boy," he says, "though I am 30 years old, bring us fresh water." "Cold." I nod. I am too tired to be annoyed by the tone. I take a clay pitcher and walk to the fountain in the frigidarium, the cold room. The transition between rooms is a shock. The frigidarium is unheated, with a high vaulted ceiling. The plunge pool here is round and deep. The water is cold, piped in from a different spring. I fill the pitcher. The sound of the water splashing into the clay vessel is sharp and clear, echoing off the high walls. It is a clean sound, unlike the muffled bubbling of the hot springs. When I return to the men, they are arguing about a bet. I set the pitcher down. One of them, a potter I recognize from the market, looks at me. He sees the exhaustion in my face. He reaches into his belt and pulls out a coin, a dupondius brass, worth 2 asses. He presses it into my wet hand. "Drink some yourself," he says. I nod, clutching the coin. The metal is hard and real against my soft palm. The final hour of the shift is a slow deceleration. The tasks become less about service and more about restoration. We must prepare the bath for tomorrow. I am joined by 3 other slaves. We take stiff brooms made of birch twigs and sweep the floors of the changing rooms, a poditerium. The floor is littered with the debris of the day. Mud from sandals, dropped jewelry, broken strigils, scraps of food. We find a silver ring in the dust. It has a gemstone, a carnelian engraved with a lion. By law, this belongs to the bathhouse owner, or perhaps the temple. But we look at each other. Marcus picks it up. He wipes it on his tunic. He walks over to the votive box near the entrance, the heavy iron-bound chest where offerings to Sulis are kept. He drops the ring through the slot. It clinks against the coins inside. "It is better to give it to the goddess," he mutters. "If the manager sees it, he will only buy more wine for himself." We finish sweeping. The sun has set. The bathhouse is lit now by oil lamps. Hundreds of them. Small terracotta lamps are placed in niches along the walls, their wicks floating in oil. They cast a flickering, warm light that makes the shadows dance. The steam looks like smoke in this light. The last bathers are leaving. Their voices drift away into the cool evening air outside. The great doors are barred. Now comes the silence. The only sound is the water, the gurgle of the overflow, the bubbling of the spring, the drip of condensation falling from the high roof into the pool. Plippy, plippy. I sit down on a wooden bench in the apoditerium. My legs are trembling. I look at my hands. The skin is white and wrinkled, the nails soft. I smell of other people's dirt and the pervasive sulfur. The balneater, the bath manager, walks through. He is carrying a tablet, tallying the receipts of the day. He looks at us, sitting in a row, exhausted. "The furnace needs wood for the night," he says, not looking up. "Make sure the stokers have enough oak. Then you can eat." He walks away. I let out a long breath. It is not a sigh of complaint, just a release of pressure. I stand up. My knees pop. "Come on," I say to Marcus. We walk through the service door, leaving the marble and the mosaics behind. We descend into the service tunnels, the Prefurnium. Here the air is dry and choked with wood smoke. The heat is aggressive, a dry blast from the mouth of the furnace. The stokers are there, men with skin like leather, their eyes white in soot-blackened faces. We begin to haul the logs. Rough-hewn oak, heavy and dense. We stack them near the furnace mouth. The fire roars, a living thing that eats the forest to warm the water for the empire. By the time we are done, my arms feel like lead. But the work is finished. We step out of the service tunnels and into the courtyard behind the bathhouse. The air is startlingly cold. It is a British night, damp and crisp. The sky is a deep, bruised purple, speckled with the first stars. I lean against the rough stone wall of the compound. I reach into my sash and pull out the coins I earned today. 1 quadrans, 1 dupondius. It is not a fortune. It is enough for a loaf of bread, a bowl of stew, and perhaps a cup of watered wine. I close my eyes and listen to the wind rustling the trees beyond the wall. For a moment, I am not a servant. I am just a man standing in the dark, feeling the heat leave his body, waiting for the strength to walk home. The last patron has finally departed, leaving behind only the echo of sandals slapping against wet stone and the heavy, humid silence of the great bath. My shift does not end with their exit. In fact, the most grueling portion of my labor begins now, in the dimming light, when the glamour of the complex falls away to reveal the filth of the day. The air in the great hall is thick, almost chewable. It tastes of sulfur, sweat, and the cloying sweetness of scented olive oil that has turned rancid on hundreds of bodies. The water in the main pool, usually a vibrant, steaming green under the midday sun, now looks like dark ink, swirling with the scum of human presence. I stand at the edge of the opus signum floor, the crushed tile and mortar cool against my bare soles. My tunic, once a rough, dry wool, is now sodden, clinging to my chest and thighs like a second, heavier skin. It chafes at the armpits and groin, a constant, dull irritation that I have learned to push to the back of my mind. My first task is the surface. I take up a long wooden pole with a flat, perforated board attached to the end, a skimmer of sorts. I must drag the surface of the water to catch what floats. The motion is repetitive. Extend, dip, pull, lift, extend, dip, pull, lift. I dredge up the refuse of the empire. There are threads of linen from towels, stray hairs that clump together like water spiders, and the slick, iridescent film of body oil. Occasionally, the skimmer hits something solid. Tonight, it is a wooden comb, missing half its teeth, floating near the steps. I fish it out and toss it into a woven rush basket destined for the furnace room. Anything burnable fuels the hypocaust. In Britannia, fuel is precious. The humidity is dropping as the heat from the hypocaust beneath the floors begins to wane, though the water itself remains hot, fed by the sacred spring of Sulis. The temperature difference between the water and the cooling air creates a thick mist that hovers knee-high. I move through it like a ghost. I kneel at the poolside to scrub the overflow lip. This is where the grime collects most aggressively, a gray paste of dead skin and dirt. I use a handful of rough sand and a stiff brush made of bristle. The sound of the scrubbing is harsh, a rhythmic grinding that grates against the vast silence of the vaulted ceiling. My knuckles are raw, the skin bleached white and wrinkled from hours of exposure to the damp. While scrubbing, my fingers brush against something cold and metallic wedged in the drainage channel. My heart gives a single, hopeful thump. A coin, a denarius dropped by a careless merchant. I pry it loose, my fingernails digging into the slime. It is not a coin. It is a small, rolled sheet of lead. A curse tablet, a defixio. I hold the cold metal in my palm. It is heavy, despite being no larger than a thumb. Someone has scratched a prayer to Sulis Minerva onto this lead, asking her to punish a thief or a rival, and tossed it into the sacred spring. It must have washed into the main bath by mistake. I do not unroll it. To read a curse is to invite its attention. I feel a prickle of superstitious dread travel up my neck, distinct from the damp chill. I toss the lead scroll back into the deep water, watching it sink rapidly to the bottom. Let the goddess sort out the grievances of men. I have only the grievances of the floor to attend to. Once the scrubbing is done, I move to the oil lamps. The great hall is lit by niches filled with terracotta lamps, dozens of them. They are sputtering now, low on fuel. I carry a heavy clay pitcher of tallow, not good olive oil. That is for the patrons. I move from niche to niche. The smell of the extinguished wicks is sharp and acrid, biting through the sulfur. I pinch out the flames with calloused fingers that no longer feel the heat, leaving the hall in the gray twilight, filtering in from the high arched windows. My work in the bathhouse proper is finished. I walk toward the service corridors, my sandals skidding slightly on the slick stones. I pass the entrance to the laconicum, the dry, sweating room. The heat radiating from it is dying, but still intense. I hear the coughing of the furnace slave, hidden away in the bowels of the building, raking out the ashes of the day's fires. We do not speak. We are both too tired, and the hierarchy of misery keeps us separate. He breathes smoke, I breathe steam. I enter the changing room reserved for the staff. It is little more than an alcove with pegs driven into the wall. I strip off my wet tunic. The air hits my skin, cold and shocking. I use a strigil, an iron scraper, to drag the day's accumulation of sweat and oil from my own arms and chest. The metal edge is dull, but it serves. I wipe the blade on a rag that is stiff with dried dirt. I dress in my dry tunic, or rather, my less wet tunic. It is coarse brown wool, undyed, smelling of the sheep and the straw mattress it lay upon. I lace my caligy, the heavy, hobnailed sandals. The leather is stiff and unyielding. I wrap a thicker cloak around my shoulders, pinning it with a simple bone fibula. The cloak is scratchy, but it holds the heat. Leaving the bath complex, I step out into the town of Aquae Sulis. The transition is absolute. Inside, it was the sound of water and the smell of sulfur. Outside, it is the smell of wood smoke and the chaotic noise of a settlement settling down. The sky is a bruised purple, the sun having dipped below the rolling hills that surround the valley. The streets are paved with irregular slabs of limestone, slick with the omnipresent British rain. My iron hobnails clatter loudly on the stone, sparking occasionally. I keep my head down. A bath attendant does not make eye contact with the soldiers patrolling the temple precinct. They stand in groups, their armor dull in the fading light, speaking a guttural mix of Latin and the local Celtic tongue. I walk through the temple courtyard. The great altar to Sulis Minerva is still smoking, the embers of the day's sacrifices glowing like angry eyes. The smell of burnt meat hangs heavy here, mixing with the incense. Beggars cluster near the columns, hoping for the scraps of the sacrificial feast. But the priests have already cleared the tables. I exit the sacred precinct and enter the vicus, the civilian settlement that clings to the bath and temple like barnacles on a ship's hull. The architecture changes here. The stone gives way to timber and wattle and daub. The buildings lean in toward the street, their upper stories overshadowing the muddy path. The mud is deep here. It sucks at my sandals with every step, a squelching, wet sound that accompanies the evening chorus of the town. I hear the clang of a smithy hammering out the last ironwork of the day, the rhythmic thudding of a loom from an open window, and the shouting of a mother calling her children in from the gloom. I navigate by the smells. There is the tannery near the river, emitting a stench of urine and rotting hide that makes the eyes water. There is the bakery, closed now, but still radiating the warmth of the ovens and the ghost scent of toasted grain. And everywhere, the smell of humanity packed too close together, sewage running in the open drains, unwashed bodies, animals kept in backyards. My destination is a tenement block, an insula near the riverbank. It is a 3-story timber structure that seems to groan under its own weight. I live on the ground floor in the rear, a space shared with 4 other men who work the various trades of the town. I push open the heavy wooden door. It drags against the earthen floor, scraping a semicircle in the packed dirt. The room is dark, lit only by a single rushlight dipped in fat that sits on a low wooden stool. The flame is small and smoky, casting long, dancing shadows against the rough plaster walls. The air inside is stagnant, warmer than the street, but thick with the smell of 5 men and their drying clothes. My messmates are already there. Ciso, a porter at the market, is sitting on his pallet, picking at a callus on his foot. Marcus, who works the bellows at the smithy, is lying on his back, staring at the ceiling beams. We exchange grunts of recognition. There is no energy for conversation. The day strips us of words. I move to my corner of the room. My space is defined by a straw mattress rolled against the wall and a small wooden chest that holds my few possessions. I unpin my cloak and hang it on a nail. The wool is damp from the mist outside. It will not dry by morning. Hunger is a sharp cramp in my stomach. It has been many hours since the morning meal of watered wine and bread. I go to the communal hearth in the center of the room. It is a simple stone circle with a vent in the roof above. Though most of the smoke seems to linger in the room, stinging the eyes, a pot sits in the embers. Dinner is pools, a porridge made of emmer wheat. It has been simmering for hours, thickening into a gray, gluey mass. Tonight, there are no vegetables in it, no scraps of bacon fat, just grain, water, and salt. I take my wooden bowl from my chest. It is smooth from years of use, dark with the oil of 1,000 meals. I scoop a ladleful of the porridge into the bowl. It lands with a heavy, wet slap. I take a piece of hard bread baked 3 days ago and use it as a spoon. I sit on my mattress to eat. The porridge is hot, burning the roof of my mouth, but I welcome the pain. It is a feeling. The texture is gritty. The millstones in this province are soft, and sand often ends up in the flour. I crunch down on the grains, tasting the earth of Britannia. The flavor is bland, salty, and filling. It sits heavy in the belly, a stone to weigh me down for sleep. To wash it down, I pour a cup of pasca from a clay jug we share. The mixture of water and sour wine vinegar is sharp. It cuts the slime of the porridge and cleanses the palate. It tastes of grapes that were never sweet, of a sun that feels very far away from this foggy island. As I eat, the room settles. The only sounds are the scraping of wood on wood as bowls are cleaned, and the chewing of hard bread. The river is high, Ciso says suddenly. His voice is raspy. Might flood the cellar if the rain keeps up. Let it flood, Marcus replies, without lifting his head. Wash the rats out. That is the extent of our evening discourse. The threat of the river is real, but it is a problem for tomorrow. Tonight we are dry enough. I finish the last of the porridge, wiping the bowl clean with the crust of bread, which I then eat. Nothing is wasted. I take a rag and wipe the bowl, then return it to the chest. There is a small amount of leisure time now, in the gap between eating and sleeping, though leisure implies enjoyment. It is merely maintenance. I sit cross-legged on the straw mattress and pull my foot into my lap. The skin of my soles is white and boggy from the wet floors of the bath, but the heels are cracked and blackened. I take a small pot of tallow, sheep fat, from my chest. It smells of mutton. I dig a finger into the grease and rub it into the cracks of my heels. The grease creates a barrier against the damp. I massage the arch of my foot, feeling the muscles knot and release. My hands, too, need attention. The sulfur water dries the skin until it flakes. I rub the remaining tallow into my knuckles and cuticles. I inspect my tunic. There is a fraying hem near the knee. If I do not fix it, the wool will unravel. I take a bone needle and a length of coarse thread. By the flickering light of the rushlight, I make crude, stabbing stitches. My eyes strain in the gloom. The smoke from the light makes them water, blurring the needle. I work by feel as much as by sight, the rough wool familiar under my fingertips. Around me, the others are preparing for sleep. Ciso blows out the rushlight to save the fat. The room plunges into absolute darkness, save for the faint red glow of the hearth embers. I put the needle away in the dark, trusting the muscle memory of my hands to find the latch of the chest. I lay back on the mattress. The straw rustles loudly, crying out under my weight. It is compressed and thin in places, offering little protection from the cold earth floor beneath. I pull my scratchy blanket up to my chin. It smells of dust and old sweat. The sounds of the night amplify in the darkness. I hear the wind rattling the wooden shutters of the window. I hear the rush of the river, Avon, swollen and angry, churning against the pilings of the bridge nearby. Somewhere in the building, a dog barks, a sharp, repetitive sound that eventually fades. My body begins to shut down. The ache in my shoulders, from hours of scrubbing and hauling wood, transforms from a sharp pain into a dull, throbbing hum. My feet burn and freeze at the same time. I close my eyes, but the darkness behind my eyelids is not black. It is filled with the green swirl of the bathwater. I see the faces of the patrons, the wealthy merchants with their soft bellies, the soldiers with their scars, the sick seeking healing from the goddess. I see the steam rising, twisting like spirits. I try to push the bathhouse out of my mind. I try to think of something else. I think of the lead curse tablet sinking into the spring. I wonder who stole the ring or the cloak that warranted such a curse. I wonder if the goddess is listening, down there in the hot dark of the earth. A flea bites me on the calf. I reach down and scratch it, a reflex that does not even break my train of thought. The cold of the room settles over me. I curl my legs up to my chest to preserve warmth. The breathing of the other men deepens, turning into the rhythmic rasp of sleep. Marcus begins to snore, a wet, rattling sound. I match my breathing to the slow pulse of the house. In, out. The air is cold in my nose. Slowly, the sensation of the rough blanket fades. The smell of the smoke fades. The sound of the river merges with the blood rushing in my ears. The weight of the day, the weight of the water, the weight of the stone, all of it slips off my shoulders. I drift. The bath is gone. The town is gone. There is only the dark and the welcome, empty silence of sleep.